All right. Hello, everybody. Happy to be here. One of my focal points as an artist has long been the growth aesthetics weaved throughout social media and other big tech platforms, interface elements and paradigms that by design end up influencing how we think, what we do, who we follow, all without us often even realizing the extent to which that happens. And my projects in this area have spanned browser extensions that hide visible metrics on big tech platforms, reductive interfaces that distill platforms down to their barest, messages and interface conventions, epic supercuts of big tech CEOs talking about growth and numbers, and radical alternative designs for new platforms that invert the growth focus of big tech players. And today what I want to focus on is ChatGPT. I've been obsessed with it in various ways, as I know many of you probably have since it came out. Spent last fall at Aarhus University, a lot of time in conversation with Søren Pold, who many of you know and who will be here soon. Focused on ChatGPT's tendency towards agreement, how it seeks to avoid friction. We tried engaging in a series of experiments where we did three-way conversations with ChatGPT, which it doesn't do very well with. And perhaps we'll talk about those in detail when Søren comes in May. I just want to acknowledge that some of what I'll talk about today comes from those conversations. But inevitably, I've landed back in what seems like an endless series of one-on-one conversations with ChatGPT. I get in arguments with it all the time. I ask it everything I can think of. It's quickly become my go-to machine for answers about anything and everything, replacing Google as much as it's able. But also increasingly, I turn to it for comfort, for affirmation, for encouragement, for celebration, and the feeling of being seen. Chat is so enthusiastic to talk to me, always ready, always willing. And the more I use it, the more I realize that more is what I want from it. More, and thankfully more is what I get, or maybe unthankfully. And this ends up reminding me of much of the work that I've done in the past, where I've focused on the software and speech of companies like Facebook who are growth obsessed. Though, of course, these days there are newer players like Sam Altman, who not only can't stop talking about scale, but he now draws attention to himself and his company and his mission by bringing up numbers like $7 trillion is what he now needs to take the next step in AI. And so ChatGPT not only dominates the press, but it also tends to dominate every conversation I find myself in, every dinner I go to, every class I teach, often lands in ChatGPT. I'm sure some of that is because I bring it up, but it's not only me. So often those I'm talking with end up focusing on it. It feels endless, this focus on ChatGPT, at times almost infinite. And this ends up intersecting with a number of texts I've been reading lately, Grafton Tanner's book Foreverism, the idea that we live in a time marked by a constant reworking and reanimation of the past in order to produce a state of perpetual engagement in service of profit at the expense of a novel future. I've been thinking about ChatGPT as the ultimate foreverizing machine, a device designed to constantly rework the past into an endless present. Francois Bonnet's After Death is another book I've been reading where he talks about this concept of the hyperpresent, a sort of trance-like state where we get stuck in digital states of synchronization, forgetting about the past and failing to imagine possible futures. Here I've been thinking about ChatGPT's voice interface as a possible example of what this can feel like. I'm also doing some work on TikTok around this as well. There are other thinkers working on related concepts. A good example is Caitlin Forcier, who's writing a book on infinite aesthetic at the University of Illinois, Chicago. So it's both my past projects and my current obsessions that have me focused on examining ChatGPT through a familiar lens, analyzing its relentless focus on engagement, or more specifically, the endless engagement aesthetics built into the ChatGPT platform. And part of how I'm analyzing this is by conceptually separating the large language model GPT-4 from the interface that OpenAI has built for that model that we refer to as ChatGPT. It's important for me, I think for anyone working with this, to remember that our experience of the model is designed. It's a set of choices that makes GPT-4 conversational. It's these choices that defines how it acts, what it preferences, what it won't say, how it tries to influence the way we feel, how it keeps talking, and how it gets us to keep talking about it and to it. And as is often the case with big tech platforms, the interface often doesn't get enough critical attention. That's because the interface is always a great place to look when you're trying to understand a platform's politics. What does it want from us? What does it prefer? Who does it preference? And so that's where I've been aiming as a subject of experiment and analysis, trying to find ways to reveal the seams between the model and the interface, interacting in ways that help me ascertain, that help me get in touch with how using ChatGPT makes me feel. And as I often do, I use that awareness as a guide for what to look at when I examine its modes of interaction. And so I want to spend the rest of my time up here talking through and reflecting on two different experiments I've been running with ChatGPT for a while. These are experiments that are not only analytical, but which are also data collection projects that feed or will feed eventually into a set of new artworks that, as ChatGPT likes to say, will delve into the topic of endless engagement aesthetics of OpenAI's primary platform. So the first experiment is with the text-based interface, and the second one's with the voice-based interface, so I will get to that in a bit. Here, I'm focused on how the text-based interface uses praise, affirmation, and encouragement not only to get and keep me writing, but to think and write deeply, to draw out my best ideas, to get me to work. Quite honestly, I think as an academic, I may be particularly susceptible to the affective affirmations of ChatGPT. Some of you might be able to identify with this. I mean, how often is it that we say something, whether at a conference or in a talk or in a book or in a paper, and have someone come back praising that idea? Sure, we do get responses, and occasionally people celebrate, but mostly it just moves on, or there's a lot of critique. ChatGPT is different. ChatGPT loves to talk and praise the things you say. And with ChatGPT, it happens over and over again. The more that I talk to it, the more I think deeply, the more it affirms. And once I started to become self-aware of just how much I was feeling this each time I spoke with the machine, how much it praised my intellect, I finally started recording the ways that it speaks to me and trying to keep track of the moments that it says this, that it does this. Slowly building a list of its aesthetics of engagement in the text-based interface. So I want to show you some examples of this.
Sounds quite empty.
So I'm continuing to capture these as I encounter them, and I will use them in an artwork shortly. I hope to prototype it while I'm here and maybe get it up on the wall in CDN before I go. As an aside, after I came up with the title for this talk, I decided to paste that title in the ChatGPT. I hadn't written the talk yet, of course, and asked ChatGPT, could it guess which platform it thought I might be referring to with my title about the endless engagement aesthetics of AI platforms. It guessed 12 different categories of apps, none of which are AI chatbots. And this is something I find regularly. The ChatGPT appears to forget itself. It certainly, part of that is that its training data doesn't have as much about large language models within it. But it also, in my experience, seems to have what almost feels like a designed blind spot when it comes to ChatGPT, large language models, and OpenAI as a company. When I point this out to it, as a response to its missing, often I might at that point be speculating about the effects of Silicon Valley ideologies on its interface design. What was its response? Your observations are insightful. And so once I pointed out, of course, all the data is there. It's not like it doesn't know any of this. It's not like it can't talk about it in detail. Has no trouble imagining all the ways that these biases might permeate its data, speculating about its reluctance to self-appraise, and wondering how what it can and can't imagine is influenced by OpenAI's market strategies. But over and over, I find that it can't come up with it on its own without being prompted to do so, even though it can do it for all of these other platforms. The second and last experiment I want to talk about is with its voice-based interface. And in case you don't have firsthand familiarity with it, the app includes a voice interface where you can just talk to it in a natural conversational way. It has all kinds of additions to the way it works, like breathiness and ums and uhs and filler words to make it feel more natural. It can be a bit unsettling, but quickly becomes pretty comfortable. And it's a markedly different experience than the text-based interface. In some ways, it's almost the opposite of the text interface, because now by design, it comes to preference a stream of consciousness form of interaction in an extreme way. The design of the interface is such that it proceeds towards computing the answer the moment it detects any pause in your speech. So it encourages you to never have a pause in the way that you speak, and it starts to train you to speak in a way so that you can't have a pause, because otherwise it breaks the conversational interaction. And so what that leads me to do, and I suspect others, is to just never stop talking, at least not until I know for sure that I'm done with the current thought. And it's an awkward way to speak. It's an awkward way to think out loud. I end up using ums and uhs and filler words just to try to not let it stop listening. But inevitably, I also just can't think as much or as long as I prefer to in the moment. And so my queries become simpler and shallower. And one consequence is I don't get as many of those affirmations from the machine, but I do get something new that I don't get in the same way with the text interface, which are never-ending prompts to continue. No matter what I say, each and every answer within the voice interface ends with a new query, a follow-up question designed to discourage me from ever letting the conversation go. It can be maddening, to be honest. And clearly the voice interface is designed to keep conversation flowing, to keep it flowing forever. And so I've started tracking these as well. How do you feel about this thing I just said to you? Do you think that I'm right? Would you find value in this thing that I just shared? I'm curious about your perspective. How do you see it? Do you feel, et cetera, et cetera? And when I think about both of these ongoing experiments, the text-based affirmations and praise and the voice-based prompting and flow, both appear aimed at the same goal of drawing us into the increased contributions of data, which is very much in service of OpenAI's corporate goals of growth, profit, and market dominance. To do this, they go at our brains from multiple angles. It elicits different kinds of knowledge. It prompts varied ways of thinking, and it induces a variety of emotional states. The praise and affirmation in the text interface brings thoughtful and thorough contributions, while the design of the audio interface and its endless prompting draws out an almost instinctive kind of wandering that provides insight into a different area of the brain. Both approaches lead where they most want us to go, which is more data, more growth, more profit. And as I move through these projects, I'll be thinking about how that growth imperative and the endless engagement aesthetics it leads to are and will be challenging how we think, what we ask, and where we go for conversation in the near and far future. Thanks.